It was a cold winter night when Jake found himself driving down a winding road in the middle of nowhere, the headlights of his old pickup truck cutting through the thick fog. The engine hummed steadily as the tires kicked up bits of snow from the road. Jake wasn't expecting much, just another lonely drive through the barren countryside. But something felt different tonight. There was a strange chill in the air, even for winter, and an uneasy feeling in the pit of his stomach that he couldn't shake. His mind wandered back to the phone call he had received that morning, the one that had brought him here. It was from an old friend, Sam, who had called about a strange situation. Sam had been a rancher for decades and knew the ins and outs of the wilderness better than anyone. When Sam told Jake that he had received word of a pack of wolves hunting near the outskirts of his land, Jake didn't think much of it. Wolves were no strangers to these parts, and they usually stayed away from people. But Sam's voice had trembled when he mentioned a Mustang horse, a wild, free-roaming mare that had been living on the edge of his ranch for years. The horse had been spotted near the pack of wolves. Jake didn't think it was much of an issue at first. The wolves would probably move on. But then Sam mentioned that the Mustang had been acting strangely, almost as if it were trapped, unable to escape. That's when Jake knew he couldn't ignore it. He owed Sam too much to let something happen to that horse, especially after everything Sam had done for him over the years. As Jake neared the ranch, his thoughts continued to race. He had seen the Mustang before, a beautiful, untamed creature with a wild spirit that matched the ruggedness of the land. But now it was in danger. His hands tightened on the wheel as he pressed the accelerator, the snow crunching under his tires as the truck climbed up the hill toward the ranch. When Jake arrived, the place was eerily quiet. There were no lights on in the main house, and no sign of life around the barns or stables. Sam's truck was parked outside, but there was no sign of him. Jake hesitated, unsure of what to do next. He grabbed his flashlight from the glove compartment and stepped out into the freezing air. The snow was falling in thick, heavy flakes now, blanketing the ground in a thick layer of white. The night seemed to stretch on forever, the only sounds the crunch of snow underfoot and the distant howling of the wolves. He moved toward the barn, the beam of his flashlight cutting through the darkness. The barn doors were slightly ajar, and he could hear the faint sound of hooves scraping against the wood floor. He pushed open the doors and stepped inside, his breath fogging in the cold air. The sight before him took him by surprise. There, in the middle of the barn, stood the Mustang, her coat a striking shade of chestnut, her mane wild and untamed. But it wasn't just the horse that caught Jake's attention. No, it was the pack of wolves surrounding her, their glowing eyes fixed on her, as if they were preparing to strike. The Mustang's body was tense, her eyes wide with fear. She backed away slowly, inching toward the far corner of the barn, her hooves clattering against the wooden floor. Jake's heart pounded in his chest as he watched the wolves circle her, their teeth bared. He knew he had to do something, but what? He didn't have a weapon, and the wolves were far too close for comfort. In that moment, Jake's mind flashed back to the stories Sam had told him over the years about the wild, untamed creatures that roamed the land. He had always been in awe of how Sam spoke about the wilderness, the respect he had for the creatures that called home. Sam often said that it was the horse that was the true spirit of the land, not the wolves. But now, it seemed like the wolves had made their move. Jake knew he had to act fast, or it would be too late. He thought about his options, his heart racing. There had to be a way to get the Mustang out of here. He couldn't just stand by and watch as the wolves attacked her. Suddenly, the sound of a loud growl broke through the silence, and Jake saw one of the wolves lunge forward. The Mustang reared back, kicking her powerful hooves in a desperate attempt to defend herself. The wolves scattered for a moment, but they didn't back down. They were hungry, and they were determined. Jake's eyes flicked around the barn, searching for something, anything, that could help him. That's when he spotted the old rope hanging from the ceiling. He grabbed it, his hands shaking, and quickly tied a loop at the end. He had no idea if this would work, but it was his only shot. He tied the other end of the rope to a post near the door, then sprinted toward the Mustang. He knew he had to get her attention, distract the wolves somehow. With his heart pounding in his ears, Jake shouted at the top of his lungs, waving his arms. "Hey, get away from her," he yelled, his voice trembling with urgency. The wolves paused, their eyes narrowing as they turned to face him. For a moment, the air was thick with tension. Jake took a step forward, his mind racing. What had he done? The wolves were now focused on him, their growls echoing in the barn. But then, something unexpected happened. One of the wolves, larger than the others, stepped forward. Its eyes locked onto Jake's, and for a brief moment, they just stared at each other. Jake's heart skipped a beat. The wolf was unlike any other he had seen. Its fur was dark, almost black, and its stance was regal, powerful. It wasn't just a wild animal. It was the alpha, the leader of the pack. And it seemed to be sizing Jake up. The Mustang, sensing her chance, bolted from her corner, moving with incredible speed and grace. The wolves began to chase after her, but Jake didn't let them get too far. He tugged on the rope, pulling the makeshift trap into place. The alpha wolf, realizing what Jake had done, let out a piercing howl. But it was too late. Jake rushed to the Mustang, guiding her toward the open doors. His heart raced as he heard the pack closing in, their growls growing louder. The alpha wolf, in a fit of rage, lunged toward them, but Jake was ready. He grabbed a nearby pitchfork and thrust it forward, using it to fend off the wolf. The wolf snarled, but it hesitated. It wasn't just a fight, it was something else, something Jake couldn't quite understand. The alpha wolf turned its gaze toward the Mustang, its eyes softening for just a moment. It almost seemed as though it was watching over her. For a split second, everything froze. Jake was ready to strike, but then the alpha wolf did something unexpected. It backed off, slowly, giving the Mustang a chance to escape. The other wolves hesitated too, as if they had received some silent command. They too turned and disappeared into the night, their glowing eyes fading into the darkness. Jake stood there, breathless, in the silence that followed. The Mustang, now safe, nudged his hand gently with her nose, as if thanking him for saving her. He could hardly believe what had just happened. The wolves had given up without a fight, and the alpha it hadn't attacked. But why? What had made the wolves back off like that? Jake didn't have the answers, but one thing was certain. He had just witnessed something extraordinary, something that defied all logic. As he led the Mustang back to the safety of the barn, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. Something was different. There was a deeper connection between the Mustang and the wolves, one that Jake could barely begin to comprehend. And as the cold wind howled outside, he realized that whatever had happened tonight, it had changed everything. Jake had saved the Mustang, but the question remained, what had truly been at stake? And what would happen next? The suspense lingered in the air, thick and heavy, like the fog that still clung to the land. The Mustang, now safely inside the barn, nickered softly as she stood beside Jake. Her large, dark eyes glistened in the dim light of the barn, her breath visible in the cold air as she paced back and forth, clearly shaken but also grateful. Jake stood silently for a moment, leaning against the wooden beams of the barn, his mind racing. The events of the night had unfolded like a dream, no, more like a nightmare, and he couldn't shake the image of the alpha wolf's gaze from his mind. There had been something undeniably strange about the way the wolves had backed off, something he couldn't explain. He turned his gaze back to the Mustang. She was a creature of the wild. Her blood ran with the spirit of freedom, of the untamed. And yet, tonight, Jake had saved her. But something about the way she responded to the wolves, and to him, felt like a part of a bigger story. There was more to this horse, more to the wilderness, than he could understand. A sudden noise from outside the barn made Jake jump. His hand instinctively reached for the pitchfork he had used earlier to defend the Mustang, but it was now resting on the wooden floor beside him. He quickly grabbed his flashlight, swinging the beam toward the barn doors. The sound was faint at first, like a low growl in the distance, but it grew louder with every passing second. And then it hit him. The wolves were still out there. He stepped closer to the door, his heart pounding in his chest. The last thing he needed was to be caught out there, alone in the dark, with the pack still on the prowl. Jake knew that if they had been watching from the shadows, waiting for an opportunity, they would be back, stronger and angrier than before. But what was it that had made them back off earlier? Was it because of the Alpha's strange decision, or was there something else at play here? His thoughts were cut short as he heard the sound of footsteps approaching. The heavy crunch of snow under boots. Someone was coming. Jake's muscles tensed. His mind raced, trying to piece together what was happening. Was it Sam? Could he have come to check on him? It wasn't like Sam to make a late-night trek out to the barn. But then again, things weren't exactly normal anymore. Jake swung the barn door open just enough to peer through the crack. He could make out a figure in the distance, moving slowly toward the barn. The flashlight beam cut through the darkness, and he saw the outline of a man, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a heavy jacket against the cold. It was Sam. Relief flooded Jake's chest, but it was short-lived. There was something about Sam's movements, the way he was walking. He was hunched over, almost as if he were struggling to keep his balance. And there was a strange, wild look in his eyes, as though he had seen something in the woods that had rattled him. "Sam," Jake called out, stepping out of the barn. "Sam, over here." Sam didn't respond at first. Instead, he continued to stumble forward, his eyes fixed on the barn doors. The closer he got, the more Jake could see that something wasn't right. Sam's clothes were torn in places, and his face was streaked with dirt. His hands, covered in fresh scratches, were shaking as he reached for the barn door. "Sam," Jake called again, now running toward him. "What the hell happened? Are you okay?" Sam finally looked up, his face pale, his eyes wide with fear. "Jake." Sam's voice was hoarse, barely a whisper. They were everywhere. Jake froze. His instincts told him to be cautious, but he couldn't let Sam be in danger alone. "Who, Sam?" "Who were everywhere?" "The wolves," Sam said, his voice trembling. "They came from the forest. There were too many of them. I thought I could make it back to the house, but they kept coming closer. They're hunting something bigger than just us." Jake's heart raced. It wasn't like Sam to be so scared. Sam had spent his entire life in the wilderness, surrounded by predators. He was used to danger, accustomed to the threats that came with the land. But this was different. "Come inside, Sam," Jake said urgently, helping his friend into the barn. "We're safe here for now. We need to figure out what's going on." Sam nodded, his movements slow and unsteady. He glanced over his shoulder, his eyes darting nervously toward the darkened woods. "You don't understand, Jake. They weren't just wolves. They were different. The Alpha, it looked at me. It didn't want to kill me. It wanted to send a message." Jake's brow furrowed. "A message?" Sam's hands clenched into fists, and his voice grew more frantic. "Yes, that's what I felt. It wasn't just hunting. It was like they were hunting for a reason. I don't know why, but it's connected to that damn Mustang. She's more than just a wild horse, Jake. She's part of something bigger. And I think the wolves know it." Jake took a step back, trying to process what Sam was saying. The Mustang had been the target of the pack, but now Sam was suggesting something even more outlandish, something that he couldn't quite grasp. What was it about the horse that was so important? Why would the wolves stop just short of attacking her? And why was the Alpha so fixated on her? Before Jake could voice his questions, a loud, distant howl pierced the night. It was close, too close. Jake and Sam both froze, their eyes widening. The howling didn't stop. It echoed through the woods, the sound growing in intensity. Jake's skin crawled. "They're here," Sam muttered, his voice barely audible. "They're coming back." Jake's heart pounded in his chest. He knew they couldn't stay in the barn forever. The wolves were circling, and they wouldn't stop until they got what they came for. But what did they want? And why did the Alpha seem to spare Sam and the Mustang? He turned to Sam, his voice urgent. "We need to get out of here. We can't wait for them to come to us. We need to get to the truck, head for town, and call for help." Sam shook his head, his expression grim. "No, we can't just run. We need to face them. The wolves, they're not going to leave until they get what they're after." Jake was about to protest, but the look in Sam's eyes made him pause. It was clear that Sam wasn't just afraid, he was determined. The man had faced down more dangerous situations than Jake could count, but something about this was different. The Mustang, Sam said, almost to himself. She's the key. We need to figure out what she really is. What she means. Jake's mind was racing. He had never thought of the Mustang as anything more than a wild horse, a creature of land, just like the wolves that roamed the wilderness. But now Sam was suggesting something deeper, something far more mysterious. Jake glanced at the Mustang, who was still standing quietly in the corner of the barn, her large eyes fixed on them both. He didn't understand it, but Sam was right. They couldn't run from this. They had to uncover the truth. Another howl echoed through the night, and this time it was closer. Much closer. We don't have much time, Jake said, his voice tight. But if we're going to do this, we need a plan. Sam nodded, his expression serious. We need to figure out what the wolves want. And we need to protect that horse. There's something more to her than we know. Jake didn't know if he believed in Sam's wild theories, but one thing was certain. The wolves weren't going to stop until they got what they came for. And if they wanted the Mustang, Jake would do whatever it took to keep her safe. The sound of paws on snow reached their ears again, and this time it wasn't just the howling. It was the sound of the wolves, their footsteps growing louder and louder. Jake's grip tightened on the pitchfork. They were coming, and there was no turning back now. What happened next, Jake couldn't predict. But one thing was certain, his life, and Sam's, would never be the same again. The wolves were closing in, and, with them, a truth that would change everything. The wolves' steps grew louder, now accompanied by an eerie growling sound that seemed to vibrate through the barn's wooden walls. Jake's hand gripped the pitchfork tighter, though it digging into his palm as he tried to steady his breathing. His thoughts were jumbled, too many questions, too many unknowns. What were the wolves after? Why was the Mustang so important? And why had the Alpha spared Sam? The Mustang's eyes flickered toward the barn door. She was still, yet Jake could sense an unusual calm about her, as though she wasn't afraid, like she knew something that they didn't. The air felt thick with tension, like a storm was about to break, and yet there was no thunder, only the low growl of the approaching wolves. Jake glanced at Sam, whose face had grown pale. We don't have much time, Sam said, his voice strained. The wolves are getting closer, and we need to figure out what's going on. You said she's important. Do you think she can help us? Jake hesitated, the words hanging in the air. He had no idea how a wild horse could help them against a pack of wolves. But then again, after tonight, nothing seemed impossible. I don't know, Jake admitted, his voice low. But I think we need to trust her. The growls outside intensified, and Jake's heart pounded in his chest. The wolves were circling the barn now, no longer just howling from a distance. They were close. Too close. We need a plan, Sam said again, his voice tight with urgency. If we're going to get out of this alive, we need to know what we're up against. And we need to use everything we have, including her. Jake nodded, though he wasn't entirely sure what Sam meant. But in that moment, as the wind howled through the cracks of the barn and the wolves' growls became deafening, he knew there was no turning back. The barn door creaked as the wind pushed against it, the sound making Jake flinch. He moved toward it, glancing at Sam. We're not going to make it through this unless we figure out how to outsmart them. Sam's face tightened. I know, but I think the wolves want something more than just the Mustang. They want to control her. There's something about her bloodline, something ancient, that they want to possess. Jake's heart skipped a beat. What do you mean? Her bloodline. Sam nodded slowly, his eyes darting toward the Mustang. She's not just any wild horse. She's a descendant of a long line of horses who roamed this land long before the wolves came. Her kind, this breed, they have a connection to the land, a power that the wolves can't comprehend. They're predators, Jake. But they're not the only predators in this world. Jake's mind raced. Could Sam be right? Could there be something more to the Mustang than he had ever realized? He glanced at her again, noticing how she was standing so still, so calm amidst the chaos. I don't understand, Jake said quietly. What are you trying to say? Are you telling me that the wolves want her blood? For power? Sam looked grim, his gaze unwavering. Yes, I think they do. They've been hunting her for years, ever since she was a foal. But she's been hidden from them, hidden here, because she's the last of her kind. If the wolves get to her, they'll have the power they need to control everything. They'll be unstoppable. Jake felt a cold chill run down his spine. So we're not just fighting for her life. We're fighting for something bigger, for the future of this land. Sam nodded, his jaw set. Exactly. The wolves are coming, and they won't stop until they have her. But if we protect her, we might be able to stop them. The growls outside had grown louder, and Jake's instincts screamed at him to move, to do something. But what? He looked at the Mustang again, feeling a strange pull, as if she were silently urging him to act. His heart pounded, and then, in a moment of clarity, he knew what they needed to do. Sam, Jake said urgently, we need to get her into the forest. We need to take her back to where she belongs. Sam's eyes widened. What do you mean? Are you out of your mind? We can't let her out there. They'll follow us. Jake shook his head. No, we can't outrun them. But if we lead them to the heart of the forest, where the oldest trees are, they won't be able to find her. That's where she's from. That's where the pack's power is weakest. The wolves won't be able to follow her there. Sam hesitated, his eyes flicking nervously to the barn doors. But you're sure about this? Jake nodded, his mind set. I've seen it before. My father told me stories about this. The wolves can't survive in those woods. The land is too old, too strong. If we get her there, we might just have a chance. Without another word, Jake grabbed a rope from the barn and quickly tied it around the Mustang's neck, guiding her gently toward the barn door. The creature didn't resist. It was as though she knew what was at stake. Stay close, Jake told Sam, his voice steady. And keep your eyes on the wolves. We don't know how close they are, but I can feel them. They're watching us. Sam nodded, his expression hardening. Let's do this. They made their way toward the barn door, and Jake could hear the wolves again, closer now, their growls filling the night air. His pulse quickened. Every instinct told him to hurry, to get the Mustang out before the wolves reached them. Just as Jake was about to push open the door, he heard a sound that froze him in his tracks. A howl, louder and more chilling than any he had heard before. It was the Alpha. Without thinking, Jake flung the door open. The night air was cold, biting, and as soon as the door creaked open, the wind carried with it a familiar scent, the unmistakable smell of wolves. But there was something different about it now, something off. It wasn't just the scent of danger. There was something more, something sinister. The Mustang let out a soft nicker, and her muscles tensed. Jake looked at her, his heart skipping a beat. The horse was more than just calm now. She was focused, her gaze fixed on the distant treeline. And then it hit him. She wasn't afraid of the wolves. She was waiting for them. Sam, Jake whispered, his voice barely audible. She's not just waiting for us. She's waiting for them. Sam looked confused. What do you mean? Jake shook his head slowly. She's not running from them. She's waiting for the right moment. The wolves won't attack her. They're afraid of her. It's like she has the power to stop them. Sam's eyes widened in disbelief. Are you serious? Jake nodded, his voice low. This is bigger than we think. The wolves don't know it yet, but they've underestimated her. She's not just a horse, Sam. She's the last of her kind. And if she's the key to stopping them, then we have to let her lead the way. The ground beneath them seemed to tremble as the wolves' howls grew louder, now just at the edge of the woods. Jake could hear their claws scraping against the frozen ground, their growls echoing through the trees. The Mustang turned to face the woods, her eyes locked on the approaching pack. Jake held his breath. What happened next would determine everything. And then, as if the Mustang had given some silent command, the wolves stopped. Their growls softened, and for a moment there was complete silence. The air was thick with anticipation, and Jake felt a chill run down his spine. For the first time in his life, he understood what Sam meant. This was more than just a fight for survival. It was a battle for the very soul of the land. The wolves had underestimated the Mustang, and now they were about to learn that the wildest creatures weren't always the most dangerous. The Alpha stepped into the clearing, His eyes locked on the Mustang. The two creatures stared at each other, and for a moment, time seemed to stand still. Then, the alpha howled, louder than ever before, and the wolves lunged forward. Jake's heart raced, and Sam's grip tightened on his rifle. But just as the pack charged, the Mustang made her move. She bolted forward, her hooves pounding against the snow, and the air seemed to shift. It wasn't just the sound of a horse running. It was the power of the land itself responding. The earth beneath their feet seemed to rumble, and the wind picked up, howling as if in response. The wolves hesitated, their eyes wide in fear. The alpha snarled, but even he seemed unsure of what was happening. Jake's breath caught in his throat. The Mustang was no longer just a wild horse. She was the force of nature itself, the guardian of the land, and the wolves had no idea what they were up against. And as the wolves hesitated, Jake knew it was their last chance. The Mustang had led them here, and now she would show them what true power looked like. The air hung heavy with tension as the Mustang stood her ground, the wind swirling around her like a shield. The wolves, still hesitant, circled, their eyes never leaving her. The alpha, massive and intimidating, let out a low growl, but it was different now, edged with uncertainty. The power that had always been in his pack now seemed diluted, as if the very earth beneath their paws had changed in the presence of this creature. Jake stood frozen, unable to take his eyes off the standoff unfolding before him. He had expected a fight, a violent clash, but this was different. The Mustang was more than just an animal now. She was a symbol of something ancient, something beyond the understanding of the wolves. The alpha let out another snarl, this time louder, more forceful, but the Mustang didn't flinch. Her eyes were calm, steady, as if she had seen this challenge before, and perhaps, in a way, she had. Her lineage stretched far beyond anything Jake had known, and now, in the face of the wolves, it was clear that the Mustang was not merely a survivor of her kind. She was the last of her kind, the last of a bloodline that had ruled this land long before the wolves came. Sam, his rifle still gripped tightly in his hands, watched the scene unfold. "What's happening?" he whispered, as though speaking too loudly might break the fragile stillness. Jake shook his head, feeling the weight of the moment. "She's not fighting them, Sam. She's showing them that they don't control this land anymore. She is the land." The words sounded strange even to his own ears, but in his heart, he knew they were true. The Mustang wasn't just a creature of the wild. She was the embodiment of it. She carried with her the spirit of everything that had come before, the forests, the rivers, the mountains. And she was here to remind the wolves that this was her home. And they would have to answer to her. The alpha took a step forward, his growl intensifying, but the Mustang didn't back down. Instead, she stepped toward him, her hooves digging into the earth, her body poised and ready. It was as if she was calling upon the very soil beneath her to rise up and meet the wolves. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Then, with a force that Jake couldn't comprehend, the Mustang reared up, her powerful legs kicking into the air, sending a shockwave through the ground. The earth rumbled beneath them, and the wind howled louder than it had before, swirling around the barn in a chaotic frenzy. The wolves, startled, jumped back, their eyes wide with fear. The alpha hesitated. His pack, once so confident in their strength, now looked uncertain. The wind shifted again, and for a brief moment, Jake could swear he saw the shadows of the trees moving, shifting, as if they were alive. And then, as though the Mustang had commanded them, the wolves began to retreat. The alpha growled once more, but it was a defeated sound, the growl of a creature realizing it had underestimated its prey. The pack, once so fierce, turned and began to slink back into the shadows, their eyes still fixated on the Mustang, but now filled with fear. Jake couldn't believe what he was seeing. The wolves, the predators who had been hunting them, who had been the embodiment of terror in the night, were backing down. The Mustang had done it. She had defeated them without even a single bite or scratch. Sam let out a breath, his body sagging with relief. "She did it," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "She stopped them." Jake could only nod, his heart still racing from the intensity of the moment. The Mustang stood tall, watching the retreating wolves, her chest rising and falling with steady breaths. There was no joy in her eyes, no victory dance. She was calm, as though this was simply another day in her long existence. For a long while, neither Jake nor Sam moved. They simply watched, as the wolves disappeared back into the forest, their howls growing distant. Finally, Sam spoke, his voice filled with awe. "I don't know how to explain this. I thought we were done for. But she really is something else." Jake swallowed hard, his gaze never leaving the Mustang. "She's more than just something else, Sam. She's the guardian of this land. She always has been. We're just lucky she decided to show us her power tonight." As if on cue, the Mustang lowered her head, the tension in her body easing. Her posture softened, and Jake felt a sense of calm wash over him. It was as though the battle was over, not just with the wolves, but with whatever had been threatening this land for so long. For a moment, the night felt peaceful again. The wolves were gone. The wind had calmed. And the Mustang, standing tall and proud, was still there, watching over them. But as Jake took a step toward her, his heart filled with a mix of admiration and uncertainty. What now? What would they do with her? She had saved them. But was this just the beginning? Was there more to this story that they didn't yet understand? "Jake," Sam's voice interrupted his thoughts. "Do you think they'll come back? The wolves?" Jake hesitated. He had no answer. "I don't know. But I think we've just seen the tip of the iceberg. There's something about her, Sam. She's not just a wild horse. She's a part of something bigger. And if we're going to protect her, we need to understand what that is." Sam nodded, his face serious. "I agree. But right now, we need to get her out of here. If the wolves come back, we need to be ready." Jake nodded. The immediate danger had passed, but the Mustang's power was undeniable. She had shown them that she wasn't just a horse. She was the protector of something ancient, something that the wolves didn't understand. Together, Jake and Sam led the Mustang out of the barn, the creature moving gracefully despite the earlier chaos. She was calm now, her steps slow and deliberate, as though she was guiding them toward a future they hadn't yet seen. The air was cool, and the night sky stretched out above them, filled with stars that seemed to shine a little brighter now. They made their way toward the forest, the only sound the crunch of snow beneath their boots and the Mustang's steady hooves. The silence felt different now, less oppressive, more hopeful. The wolves were gone, for now at least. As they walked, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't done yet. There was more to this story, more to the Mustang's purpose, more to the land itself. And if they didn't figure it out soon, they might find themselves facing an even greater challenge. But for tonight, they were safe. And that, for now, was enough. They reached the edge of the forest, where the trees stood tall and silent, their branches swaying gently in the wind. Jake stopped, turning to look at the Mustang, who stood in front of them, her eyes focused on the darkness of the woods. She was waiting, and Jake realized, with a chill that ran down his spine, that the Mustang had led them here for a reason. This was where her journey began, and where it would end. She had protected them, yes, but there was a larger battle at play. The wolves might have retreated for now, but they would be back. And when they did, it wouldn't be just for the Mustang. They would be after something much bigger. Jake knew then that the real battle wasn't over. It had only just begun. As the first light of dawn began to break over the horizon, the Mustang stepped forward into the forest, disappearing into the shadows of the trees. And Jake and Sam followed, knowing that whatever happened next, they would face it together, because the Mustang had shown them that there was a force greater than fear, a force that would protect them, no matter the cost. And with that, the story of the Mustang, the wolves, and the land's ancient power was far from over. It was only just beginning.